Hi, I'm Stephanie Earp, and welcome to episode 3 of my knitting podcast, which is beautifully titled Stephanie Earp's Knitting Podcast. Today I'm wearing an old knit, and I'm going to talk about that. I have my design, the Over Out Poncho, that I'm going to chat about. And I just got back from the Twist Festival, which is, I believe, Canada's largest fiber festival, where I was helping in Annie from Knitting It Up's booth. So I have some cool stash enhancements that I'm going to flash and talk a little bit about that experience and show you a couple things that are on my needles. So I think I will just dive in and talk about the Over and Out Poncho, which is the design that's here on the mannequin. It's one of my favorite pieces to wear that I've ever designed. It's in fact, you can probably see that it's been worn. I clean it all the time to try and keep it in tip-top shape. But I'm definitely a designer that wears my samples. That's why I make them in my size. And this one's gotten a lot of wear. So the inspiration from this design actually came from a store-bought piece, a similarly shaped poncho that I bought from the Gap, probably on the sale rack years and years and years ago, that I just loved wearing. And I find, especially with ponchos, that's not always the case. Like where to put your arms and whether you can actually do anything when you're wearing them can be difficult. And then also, like, what do you do when you go to put your coat on? And this piece, because of the way it's split, when I went to go put on my coat, I would just sort of put it up around my neck, put my coat on, and then throw the poncho back on over top of my coat. And I just thought that made this piece work in a way that other sort of poncho-y style things didn't for me. So I really wanted to recreate that shape, and I was working at Espace Tricot, tidying up the Madeline Tosh SAP or ASAP, I'm not sure how you're supposed to say it, and sort of fell in love with these three colors and really wanted to work with them together, but of course this could be made in one color as well. So the first thing to know about this is that it is not brioche. A lot of people, when I first posted it, were like, ooh, I like it, but I don't do brioche. And it's like, it's not brioche. It's actually a twisted rib. So on the right side, the knit stitches are knit through the back loop. On the wrong side, they're purled through the back loop. And the purls here, the gutter stitches on the right side are just worked as usual. And that creates this very elastic, stretchy, one-by-one rib. So one of the things to note when you're looking at the pattern and thinking about yarn, I actually give you the information in the pattern about what kind of gauge information to look for on your yarn label, because it won't be the same as the gauge actually called for in the pattern, because this really pulls everything in and your stitch gauge is going to be quite a bit smaller than you might think, but you're looking for a bulky weight yarn for this one. Let's see, it's knit from the bottom up in two pieces, and it's got a whole bunch of different decreases going on. I think that's part of what made my original, my Gap piece fit so well and sit so well. So I really looked at the way that they managed the different decreases in it. And so you can see here on the front that it's quite an extreme raglan shaping. But meanwhile, there's some shoulder shaping happening here. There's more shoulder shaping here on the back that mirrors it. And then there's another set of decreases here that are not as extreme as the raglan on the front. There's also some decreases happening in here, and eventually they sort of stack up. So it was really interesting sort of doing the math of trying to figure out how to do that in a way that these lines were nicely continued. And the way that the decreases are done, they're actually all double decreases, so that's to maintain the rib. So instead of decreasing one stitch every so many rows, you're decreasing two in paired matches. And then once you're done with your back piece, you do your front piece and you match up your colors. I think I was actually off by a row or two on this here, you can see, and that's because I miscalculated my yarn a little bit. So when I wrote up the pattern, I was careful to allow a little bit more yardage and to recalculate just by a tiny bit, like how long to do your color chunks so that you didn't run into the problem that I ran into here. But that said, I don't think anyone besides me would ever notice that. So once you've got your two pieces worked, you do a seam up here. And what I tell you to do is sort of take it easy and baste it in. Like, don't finish it until you have the chance to try it on, because that gives you the opportunity to see kind of where you want the split to be. Depending on sort of your armhole depth and how you feel comfortable working, you could seam this up further. You could seam it a little less. But you did what I did was sort of like bring my arms out at 90 degrees and see if I could like work at a kitchen counter or pick up my bag and put it over my shoulder. And that gave me the clue of where I wanted these to be. So once I was happy with that, I finished up the seam and then you pick up stitches around the neck and finish that up in a 1x1 rib. There's some decreases in the purl section here to make it nice and tight, like really just enough to get over your head. And it's really important, I think, to keep this in 2 pieces, to not be tempted to work it in the round after the split, because you really do need this pickup stitch here and this seam to give this garment some structure so that it doesn't flop around, because it is pretty heavy. I mean, it's 7 skeins of bulky weight yarn in my size, which is the smallest. So the seaming is an important part of it. And you can see that it's got a little bit of a fuzz glow to it. That's because it's a single ply yarn. You know, maybe not the smartest choice for an outerwear garment, but like I said, I fell in love with the colors. I use my gleaner a lot on this. I don't know if you guys know about the gleaner. Oh, here it is. This is a little device for taking lint off your clothes. Ideally, you lay your garment flat and then you do this and it takes all the fuzz off. You can see I've got a bunch there and you take it off. And I know a lot of people, when I mention the gleaner, they say, oh, I already have something like that. It's like a little zzz. And I have one of those too, and I love that for my store-bought knits. But because it has a blade in it, I've had some bad experiences where it has managed to catch an end or something, because it's kind of almost got like a vacuum thing going on. And because it's cutting, it's just a little scary that it could actually cut your thread. So the nice thing about the gleaner is that there's no cutting involved. It comes with like 3 different weights of this thing, and I do find it does make a significant difference in keeping your knits looking nice. They're not terribly expensive. You can find them obviously at Espace Tricot, but I've also seen them in things like Fabric Bleu, Fabric Land, places like that. But your local yarn store probably has them. So what else can I tell you about this? Oh yeah, so some other yarn possibilities. That's what I wanted to mention. So one of the yarns that I mentioned in the pattern is Lana Grande by Cascade, which is a plied bulky weight yarn in a Peruvian highland wool. And so that's going to have a lot more durability than the yarn that I chose, and is a much more affordable option. This is definitely an I work in an LYS and I get a discount kind of a choice for yarn. I understand that not everybody wants to drop like $250 to make a poncho. So there's lots of other options out there, and I was communicating back and forth with someone who bought the pattern also, who was looking at some really interesting acrylic wool blends that I think would be great. Because the other thing that's tough with this, because of its weight, is washing it. Obviously, every time you hand wash this, you have to press all the excess water out of it, roll it up in towels and dry it flat. And it takes a lot of towels to get this thing soaked out enough water out of it to feel like it's ever going to dry. And yeah, so I try not to eat anything that would stain when I'm wearing it, to avoid having to wash it too often. And when I do, I use every towel in the house. So there you go. Something to note if you're going to knit it, I definitely recommend some stitch markers, because like I said, there are these very different rates of decrease. You have to keep a lot of things going in your head at the same time. Row counter is a great idea, or maybe making a chart, like making yourself a little table that you can do some check marks. So one thing that's also important is that the length gauge, the row gauge is important, because it is a raglan shaping. So if you're trying to get these two to match up, and you're using my instructions, which are based on measurements, and your row gauge is off, you may find that one piece is longer than the other. That said, it's a really flexible piece in that sense that, like, because it's only 2 pieces, if these two have a little bit of a different length, you're probably going to be able to fudge it in your seam. And even if the front it hangs a little lower, a little bit higher, once it's on your body and you're wearing it, it's going to be pretty imperceptible. So there you go. That is the Over and Out Poncho. And as usual, I'm going to do a little podcast special. For 1 week after this podcast goes live, you can get 15% off the Over and Out Poncho in my Ravelry store with the code. Let's go with Bulky. Bulky is the code, okay? So if you go to my Ravelry area and put this in your cart, put in the code Bulky, and you get 15% off for 1 week from the published date of this podcast. It's cool. That's that. So my old knit. This is kind of the nice thing about having a podcast. I decided to just wear my wedding dress. Oh God, I just kicked the camera. Sorry guys. I'm not gonna stop. I'm just gonna keep going. Okay. I have my wedding dress on. It's big. It's fluffy. And this, what I'm wearing, was my wedding sweater. I got married in December in Quebec City, so I thought a sweater would be a good idea. And this sweater is the Lush and Lacy by SweaterBabe. So you can find her on her website, SweaterBabe.com, but she's also got other stuff on Ravelry. And this was a sweater that I had actually made once before in Malabrigo worsted, years before. And I really loved it, and I'd always had it in my head as something I'd like to try again. So I did, and this one I worked in Madeline Tosh Vintage in color Antique Lace, and I held it together with Kid Silk Haze in the color Pearl. So what's cool about this sweater is it's got this like peplum thing going on, with these big decreases. It's worked from the bottom up into this little pearl section and a lace panel, and the back is the same. Let's see, right here. But I definitely made some fairly serious modifications to this version. Just one thing I did was massively put more stitches in these, so I had more to decrease, because I really wanted to emphasize the frilliness of it. So I think I have my notes on my Ravelry project page about what I did there, but basically some things that were knit 2 together, I made them into knit 3s together. But first, obviously, I had to do the math of how many more stitches I would need in my cast on in order to have room to do that. I also replaced the lace panel. The lace panel in the original is a little bit more casual, I guess. It's like I think it's more of a diamond shape, and I really wanted something that's just like sprays of flowers or fountains. I thought that would be pretty for a wedding dress, a wedding sweater. And then the other thing I did is I actually knit my buttons on, and I think I did make a little alteration to this button band as well, but I can't remember exactly what it was. You can see that I obviously have a lot of buttons. I didn't want to sew those on. So I actually strung them on my yarn when I picked up my button band for this side, and as I was on the row before my bind off, I slipped the buttons into place and knit them in. And I didn't really even do a buttonhole. I just kind of smushed these through the cast off, because I knew I basically was always going to just put this on over my head. I don't actually open it very much. I also did some alterations to the neckline. I think this is originally a deeper neckline, and so instead of doing my decreases every other row, I decreased every row, and also switched the cuffs to some pearl, some garter ribs, garter edgings all over the place. Anyway, this was my wedding dress. So I took, obviously I took my sweater off for the ceremony to get some nice pictures with the actual dress, and then you know, when we were walking through this beautiful snowstorm in Quebec City, from our venue to our restaurant for the reception, I had my cool sweater on, my Lush and Lacy, my ultimate Lush and Lacy, which I love, and I actually still wear it, not with my wedding dress, but I wear this often with either a high-waisted skirt or like a higher waisted jeans, because the one thing is, like, when you design something and go with a big poofy skirt, the waist is pretty high, so if I'm wearing like a lower slung jean, it can look a bit funny. It needs to be up high to work. So yeah, this is the Lush and Lacy by SweaterBabe. It's a totally awesome classic pattern, and it knits up so fast. Beautiful set-in sleeve, just a really gorgeous design. So yeah, that's my old knit. So meanwhile, I've been knitting. I feel like I've been knitting so much this summer and have nothing to show for it, and it has really made me realize that I am definitely a product knitter. I get a little bit down in the dumps when I don't have something new to show for all my work. Although one of those things is that I did an enormous store sample for Espace Tricot that I worked really hard on, and with a lot of knitting. And I tend to like discount it because I've given it now to the store, and it's with them for photography, and it will eventually be posted on the Espace Ravelry, and you'll see it on their Instagram, and I'm sure I'll repost it. But there's this sort of feeling of like, what have I been doing for the last 2 months? Well, I made this big sweater, and now it's not with me, so it doesn't feel real. And then the other thing that I've been working really hard on is finishing up my design collaboration with Yarn Experiments, which is beautiful, and I can't wait to release it. I'm aiming to release it in early September. I just made like so many dumb mistakes while I was working on this sample. So the pattern's been finished and ready to go for ages, but I just kept making these dumb mistakes. Maybe I was rushing, or I was trying to do too many things at once. But obviously with something I'm working on as a design to release to the world, and also in collaboration with a dyer that I respect so much. I couldn't leave it alone, so I kept having to pick things out and reskein the yarn and work it again until I could get the details like really perfect, because I just didn't like the idea of doing my usual like, oh, it's okay, with something that's going to go out into the world. But much to my relief, that is now blocking, and I've got a hot date to do some photography on that next week and get the pattern out, like I said, early September. But meanwhile, I've been knitting, I have some other little things that I've been knitting along the way. Start with this. So this has been around forever. This is a pattern called Skipness. It was a free Rowan pattern by, I can't believe I've forgotten his name, Martin Storey. So it's just a cabled sweater, and it's originally supposed to be cropped, but I decided I'm going to make a long version, and this is in Knit Picks City Tweed DK. I've had this yarn hanging around for a long time. I have a lot of it, like a lot of it, and I knew I wanted to make a nice sweater out of it, and I just really couldn't find the right pattern, but I think this is it. I love the way the cables look in this yarn at this gauge, so I'm just sort of starting in. Obviously, I've got a long way to go, but I'll get there eventually. And then the other thing that's been on my needles that I've been meaning to update you guys on is my new Galore. I've decided to go for it. I think, doing the podcast about it last time was a bit cathartic, and I figured out what to do. So I had been sort of stalking the original Madeline Tosh colors that I'd used for the sweater, thinking I would try to recreate it. But the whole thing sort of made me feel sad because, of course, dye lots, and then I wasn't able to find some of them, and I thought, I got to give up this idea that I'm going to, like, recreate it. So instead I have to do another color. And, like, actually to see that as an exciting opportunity to, like, see what my own pattern can do. So I bought 5 skeins of Tanis Fiber Arts in Pure Wash DK. And I have my yoke and sort of the beginning of my body here. I have 3 color transitions, or 3 colors in here so far. So at the top here is Cobalt. The next color that mixes in is called Cosmic Night. And then where it starts to get a little greener here is Teal. And I have been sort of on the brink of adding my next color in now for a few weeks and haven't managed to get there. But I have some worries about it a bit because it's quite different. This is tartan. It still has that teal in it, but it's quite a switch over to sort of a browny purple. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to work into this pattern and whether it's going to be like a very stark transition. So since I'm redoing the sweater, I thought it would be a good opportunity to do my very first KAL, my first knit along, my first Cal. I think we say Cal? Okay, let's go with Cal, it's faster. My first Cal, which I'm doing over on Instagram. So if you want to join me, the Cal has began on July 31st, but it's still going all the way until October 12th, because I think I'm knitting this up thinking I will wear it as one at Rhinebeck. It would be my Rhinebeck sweater. So that's why I'm setting the deadline of October 12th. But if you want to join me and a few other people who are in the Cal over on Instagram, you would just hashtag your posts with Galore along and tag me in at Stephanie Earp, and I'll come over and check out what you're doing, and we can trade comments and thoughts and ideas about colors or any modifications. And at the end, and everyone who posts a finished object, I'm going to do a nice prize with some cool stuff from Twill and Print, and a wrist ruler, and some to-be-determined skein of squishy yarn. Oh, so speaking of modifications, though, I should tell you that this is the lower neckline that I've been considering doing on this since I first wrote the pattern. So my original comes up quite high, like it really sits right here. And so immediately after finishing, I thought, I bet you it would be really easy to drop it down by an inch by just not knitting the first increase. So what I did is I cast on the number of stitches you would have after your first increase, and then worked along from there, and in fact didn't even change the sort of numbers of how deep to make my color changes, figuring it's so easy at the end to just add an inch in my last color. So I will see soon enough how that fits. I know this looks so small, but I guarantee you it's going to block out. It's a really stretchy pattern. So that's my Galore, and I hope you'll consider coming over to Instagram to join the Galore along. If you have any questions about yarn, about color ideas, of course, I am super happy to chime in on that stuff. It's my bread and butter. Love picking colors. Oh, and I did message Tanis from Tanis Fiber Arts, and I sent her the pattern, so she should be aware of the yarn requirements. So if you're interested in working with Tanis's yarns in these colors or any of her other colors, feel free to shoot her a message and tell her that you're working on the Galore and need help picking colors, need to know what kind of yardage you need for it, for your size. So that's that. So I mentioned that I just got back from the Twist Festival in the Outaouais. It's a 3-day fiber festival, I believe the largest in Canada. That's what, at least that's what they say. And I was there helping out in the booth of Knitting It Up, which is my friend Annie. She's an amazing yarn dyer, and she was sharing a booth with Tiffany from Twill and Print. So the two of them had an awesome corner booth, and we were just, you know, doing what we do, selling some yarn all weekend. But of course, I also bought some things. So I'll flash my stash. So the first thing I bought was this amazing row counter from Twill and Print, and I know because I'm on video here, you probably can't read it, but it says just one more, and it actually has turnable. It's a fully functional row counter that's also a pin that you can put onto your bag, or you can use it without the pin. You can just put some put the pieces on the back so it doesn't catch on things. And I just think it's one of the most beautiful pieces of knitting equipment I've ever seen, and I kind of can't believe I own it. There you go. And from Annie's booth, I got these incredibly beautiful, light-colored, sort of, I don't know, almost, they feel sort of fresh and sea breezy to me, skeins of her Hampton base, which is a superwash merino cashmere nylon blend in a fingering. And I'm definitely going to be doing some kind of design with this. I haven't quite figured out what yet, but I'm really, really excited to use them. I just love these colors, and I feel like when Montreal winter turns gray, I'm going to be so happy to be working with such fresh, beautiful colors. What we have here is Echo Beach. And then actually these are two skeins from different lots of the same color called You and I. You can see one's got a little bit more purple in it, one's got a little bit more of that green. So I think that they might fade together really, really nicely. So yeah, we'll see what kind of inspiration hits me for that. And then I went to visit the booth of the Bleu Poussiere. Bleu Poussiere is an indie dyer and completely natural dyes. So no acid dyes. She's using natural elements to dye her yarn. This is a kid silk, and it's kind of two shades of very light pink. I have to admit, very similar to the colors I chose for my long Sweet Vicious, but I do love these colors, and in fact it's kind of similar to what I'm wearing here. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with these either, but I'm really looking forward to trying them out. And then finally, this was stash that I was going to pass over. So these are beautiful skeins of 100% silk from Riverside Studios. Had a booth also. And like, these are so my colors. And I went to visit them, and I went to pet them, and I went to admire them, and I thought, no, you have enough yarn, you have so much stuff on the needle, Stephanie, don't do it. And I actually managed to walk away, and then a couple hours later, my wonderful friend Diana said, I got you a present, and I said, what did you do? And she said, I got you that silk. And I was so touched and so flattered, and I don't know, it was just so lovely, and I thought that she meant she'd gotten me a skein of this silk, and I was like, oh, maybe I can do like a little neckline in silk because it feels so nice next to your skin, or maybe a little cuff. And I sort of was like thinking about what would I do with my one precious skein of this beautiful silk. And she's like, oh, no, I got you 3. And I definitely got, I believe the kids call it verklempt, or the kids called it that in like 1992. Just super touched and by her generosity and her friendship. I'm just telling you, like, the people I've, like I said, I know I said this before, the people I've met through Espace Tricot, my friends, are awesome. And I've been scheming, trying to think of an equally thoughtful gift that I can get for her to say how much I appreciate her. Thank you, Diana. All right, so these will become something. I don't know what, but I'm excited to find out. So I mentioned that like my knitting mojo wasn't going. I was making all these dumb mistakes and doing a lot of work on tiny needles as a very loose knitter. Even when a pattern calls for like a US 4 or 3, you know, something like that, I'm often working like 2 needle sizes down from that in order to get gauge. And it's just, I don't know, like starting to feel it in my hands a little bit, worrying that I was going to hurt myself. worrying about letting people down, that the knitting wasn't good enough. It's a bummer. So I decided that the best way to get over that would be to go shopping. So as you can see, the yarn, but I also did some like organizing of my stash. So I found this at Winners. It's meant to be for like a baby's changing station. At least that's the section of the store that I found it in. But as soon as I looked at it, I was like, ooh, that has potential for organizing my knitting needles. So I'm trying to tip it over without showing too much, but it has 3 sections for it, 2 little ones. I imagine that's for your diaper cream, and this one's for your diapers. But mine now holds like my knitting needles, my interchangeable sets. I have my trusty scale that everyone thinks I have for weed, but is actually for weighing yarn. My gleaner, my tassel maker. So anything really that fits in here and doesn't go anywhere else is in this side. And then I've got like some stitch markers, 7,000 tape measures, and then it actually even has these sort of pockets at the front, which I guess, are they for wipes? I mean, what? I don't know. I mean, I had a baby. I now have a child. It's not like the baby's gone. She just grew up. I just don't know what you were supposed to put in these. That's baby related, but I have my stitch holders, crochet hooks, needle gauge, things of that nature. And then there's actually really big ones on the side that could be really good for knitting patterns as well. So I'm thrilled because I know that like getting something like this from a dedicated maker, while that would be a lovely thing to do, I could never afford it, or I would never be able to justify it. This thing was like $16.99 at Winners, and it's getting the job done. And then also on the cheap, you notice I had these like cool baskets for my projects. Went to the dollar store and bought about 8 of these, because that's like where my life is at right now, where I actually have like 8 different projects or almost cast on projects that I want to be able to get access to and switch between them really easily. So I have a bunch of these on a bookshelf over on my right in my studio with each project in it, and then I can have the pattern in there, any notions. The other thing I tend to do is I like to keep my yarn labels, especially when I'm working on something that's a design, so I can go back and see how many I used. It's like an easy way to keep track of where I am in my yardage and stuff like that. So that's cool, I guess. I'm like more organized, and it did cheer me up a little bit when things were not going so great. But now the problem is that I set up in the living room with like 6 plastic buckets of projects and my baby changing station. But at least when I need to put them back where they belong, they're all in somewhat organized fashion. So I think that's it for me this time. I'm trying to think of anything else to tell you. Nope. Just trucking along. Excited for September. I have that the collaboration with Yarn Experiments will be out early September. I have another design in progress that I'm hoping will be late September or early October, which is going to be a very simple cabled sweater, maybe a possible good first cabled sweater, if that's on your list of things you'd like to do this fall. And then after that, I have, I'm really excited about a pattern that I pitched to Julie Asselin for yarn support. So she's working on some yarn for me, and I think it's going to be super great. Maybe, I don't know if it'll be for everybody, but I'm really, really looking forward to doing it. It's more in the vein of this, like doing some outerwear sort of stuff, which I really love to do. Okay, well, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Definitely come on over and join me on Instagram for the Galore Cal if you're interested. It's at Stephanie Earp. I'll flash up all of my contact information at the end. And thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you soon. Bye.